going just back into that whole illness world, hospitals and radiation and cancer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm living and dreaming and trying to figure out how to get to Portugal and trying to enjoy the city while I'm here. I'm living, building my business again, writing my book again. So, yeah.
That's a good thing. It's also, I find it also that necessity of reminding ourselves that regardless of what we know and what we've studied and how much we've done this, that, and everything else, we are still not immune. We are still human beings. So that I didn't realize that until fairly recently. Actually, yes, it's that thing.
Well, I got certain gifts from that whole experience. So yesterday, once I sort of got myself back into that head of, okay, this could be happening again, I remembered the gifts that I got. And one of the gifts was I no longer fear death at all. I no longer see it as something separate from life.
Yeah.
And I just feel this, when I'm in this frame of mind, I just feel this, what death really is just this boundless love for everything. So I remember as I was getting better, I said to myself, please don't let me forget this.
Absolutely.
I want to remember this. I want to live the rest of my life coming from this place of boundless love and knowing that there's no life, there's no death. It's all one reality, larger reality that our human minds can see. So, I don't want to suffer, of course, no one does, but I grew tremendously in self-respect and self-love.
What a wonderful thing to grow in, especially first up, self-respect, really, because if that's not present, whether it be in yourself or in a relationship with someone else, then I don't believe that much else is possible. Really.
Well, I certainly have changed. I feel how I've changed. Not that I didn't love myself, but I respect myself for how well I navigated that. I did it with grace. Excuse me.
Wonderful.
Grace and kindness and humor.
Oh, what a wonderful combination. What a wonderful trio, really. Yeah, and I'm just going to say now that what I will do with this is, because I think even though there was no introduction, as in this is you, it's just straight into it, I think that works fine for my end of things, really. And what I'll do with this is record out any of the mention of specifics at the beginning. But if it's okay with you, I will start from that place of the gifts that you have gained from this, really, because
yes, and you can even use the word if I feel these unmentionables need to be mentioned because so many people experience these things, and I've been thinking actually of doing something about this. My experience, that no one wants it. No one wants to be ill or be in grief, but there are beautiful things to find there.
Absolutely.
And my story work was pivotal in that. And I just turned everything into a story.
Yes, and that's the great gift of working in this way, coming from this perspective of the hero's journey and Campbell and navigating and gifts and all of that. And yes, it's more difficult at some times than others to actually practice this. It's hard as hell. But the essential ingredient is to actually get through it. In whatever way, shape, or form, live to tell the tale, and you will inevitably end up with art, you'll inevitably end up with an art form,
Oh, that's it. And I don't know if you want to wait till we actually are recording and talking, but I can say it again.
But we are recording. That's what I mentioned to you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
Um, so that's the artist's way. It's not why did this happen? How can I fix this? It's what can I make of this?
Mm,
What can I make with these circumstances? So we're here by choice. It gives us choice in the matter. We
right.
may be powerless over the things that happen to us,
Absolutely.
but not what we do with them. And that's where we gain some kind of mastery over our
Yes.
lives.
Yes. Yes. I mean, and tell me, because how long ago did you come upon this way of working, this way of being in the world?
Well, a long time ago. So I was married. It was my second marriage. I was unhappily married to a man whose drinking and drugging really bothered me.
Mm,
So I don't want to call him alcoholic or drug addict because if he doesn't call himself that, it's
mm,
not my right
mm,
to name him that. But that's what bothered me, and that's what interfered with any possible love.
mm,
So I was miserable, and I was at that time a journalist, and I
mm.
was just unhappy with my life and depressed. So this was back in the late 1980s. That's
Right.
how long ago it was.
Mm.
And do you want to hear how it all started?
I do. I'm always interested in beginnings. Really? Because there are
So I had bought Joseph Campbell's book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, like I bought books from Amazon. I don't know if it was Amazon in those days or if I just bought it I think I bought it in a bookstore. One of those books that you're supposed to have, but you
mm,
never read. So
mm,
it was like on the top shelf of my bookshelf.
mm,
Well, my cat, Eddie,
yeah,
liked to roam around my bookshelves. And
mm.
one afternoon when I was in my little study, he knocked that book off the shelf and it hit me in the head.
That's subtle.
Is that not the divine telling you something? So I bent down and I picked it up and I said, oh, this. And I was gonna, I just began, I was gonna put it back in the shelf, but I sort of began leafing through the pages and they were very dense and like no paragraphs, just like a very uninviting text. But
Mm,
I read something about, I don't know if he called it the hero's journey at that time or something else, but something made me stay with it. And I was in depression, a very serious depression at that time.
mm,
And I had been to therapists who had just nothing for me.
mm,
And I just couldn't engage in the process of cognitive behavioral therapy at all.
mm.
It
Yes.
meant it just didn't engage me.
Mm,
So I really got nothing from it. And they didn't share my deep, deep, soulful values.
mm, mm,
So I started reading these pages and I couldn't put it down. And I said, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm going through. I'm an initiation.
ah,
I'm not sick. There's nothing wrong with me.
mm,
I'm getting really healthy here and I'm rising
mm,
to a new place in my life.
mm,
And that was the hero's journey. I read all those pages and I read them again and again till I kind of absorbed the journey that he laid out
mm,
and what happened in the protagonist in that journey.
mm,
And then a little while later, I'd always liked myth. I was a fiction writer. So, you go to myth
mm,
sometimes for the deeper meanings of the story.
mm,
So the Persephone myth, like so many women,
mm,
touched me. She was abducted by a man into the underworld, and her mother searched for her, couldn't find her. So
mm,
her mother, who was the goddess of the earth,
mm,
turned everything to a sterile winter. And she said there would be no green, no summer, no spring until she was reunited with her daughter.
mm,
So Hecate, the goddess of crossroads,
mm,
who hears the cries from the underworld,
mm,
located Persephone and she was found. And Mercury and Zeus and the other male gods rescued her.
mm,
Well, I started writing my way through that myth
mm,
as Persephone.
how
In
beautiful.
my version of it, nobody rescued Persephone, me. I
Mm,
rescued myself.
beautiful. Mm,
And what I really discovered is that I was the character that most intrigued me in that myth was not Persephone, the lost maiden,
Mm,
or Demeter, the grieving mother,
mm,
but Hecate, the
mm.
one who hears the cries of the world.
Wow. Yeah.
That
Mm,
gave me my identity, who I was going forward. And
mm,
that was the beginning of my really taking this kind of work with myth
mm.
and story seriously. And
Beautiful.
then maybe a few months later, an announcement arrived in my mailbox for a poetry therapy training program at a mental hospital.
Mm.
And that's how I came to a maximum security unit for mentally ill male prisoners. But
Wow.
I started doing it the same way
Mm.
I healed myself from, by the way, I healed myself from depression. I wrote my way out, just like Persephone rescued herself.
Absolutely. Mm.
So I did that with the men.
And can
And
I just interrupt for 2 seconds? You know, did you connect that deep depression to the unhappiness in your marriage?
yes, but I just thought I was a defective person. My mom, my mom was, I loved my mom. And in her
Mm,
later years, she became my best friend. But
mm,
in my early years, she was very narcissistic and just unable
mm.
to be a mother to me. So that she was very competitive and she beat me down emotionally,
Mm,
verbally,
mm,
with, I wasn't good enough to be in a family and, just
tough.
meanness.
Mm,
So I always, although I was like full of bravado and show off kind of when I was young, I had this deep insecurity that I really wasn't good enough
mm, mm. And can I
to
just ask,
belong to anything.
it is as a result of this process and leading into working with this maximum security, did you separate from your marriage or was that continuing?
I did. I
Ah,
did.
yes.
I left that marriage.
Beautiful.
Um, and it was my second. It wasn't an easy thing to do. And I just so wanted that one to work. But I was like trying to make something work that shouldn't have worked.
Yes. A lot of time, a lot of energy goes into that.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
So as I began really writing through story, the hero's journey story,
mm,
and then trying it with other people who were even in more desperate circumstances than I was,
mm,
there was everybody. It wasn't me doing it because I didn't know what I was doing.
mm,
It was story. It was this arc of crisis,
mm,
struggle,
mm,
transformation. And
mm,
it's always, and healing story is a rising arc.
mm,
So it always, healing stories and creation stories and,
mm,
you know, the classic story plot
mm.
always begins with a crisis, with chaos, with disorder.
Yes.
Somebody volunteers to step out and try to find a solution, the grail, the golden elixir.
Mm,
And in the process, they not only overcome monsters on the outside, they have to face their monsters on the inside. And they overcome those and they transform into truly someone that has medicine to share,
mm.
which
Wow.
to me is this is this process of being totally with what is now,
Mm.
sensorily, in the senses
And in the body.
and in the body. The body tells the truth.
Yes, absolutely. Mm,
So story is a very
mm,
sensory experience because we use setting, we use character, we use situation. These are all very grounding,
mm,
non-intellectual
mm,
experiences.
mm. And can I just ask, sorry, and I'll just interrupt occasionally for the sake of clarity, this program that you went into in the maximum security, this was connected to a psych ward, not just a normal prison. Is that
It
correct?
was a psych. It was the forensics hospital of a large mental hospital in Washington D.C., where I then lived.
Wow. That's
So it was the so mentally ill prisoners are caught, and the psychiatrists who treat them and the social workers, excuse me, who treat them are caught
Mm.
in this trauma of we want to heal, and yet we want to know that we're sending, if we send somebody out into society, that they're safe.
Abs- mm.
So we're both their jailer and their healer, and you can't be both. So I decided,
Mm.
taking from my reporting background, that I was going to be the listener. I was going to listen to these men, and I trusted their truth. They
Mm.
had truth to tell.
Mm.
It wasn't all, what was called schizophrenia. I
Mm.
came to understand as metaphor.
Yes.
So if somebody saw a fire in the hallway, well,
Mm.
yes, there was rage in that place. And
Yes.
that
Yeah.
and that was their way of experiencing it. And their egos they were all black men, and
Mm.
black men in America, as you know,
Yes, of course.
are so crushed. So they didn't have ego strength to be able to discern the difference between metaphor
Mm.
and fact.
Absolutely. And so few do, regardless of black men in prison or, white intellectuals. Really? No,
And
there's
and really,
a connect.
and so the arts allow
Mm.
this expression of something that is potentially so brilliant and
Absolutely.
life-changing for all of us.
Mm. Absolutely.
So I became their listener, maybe their first listener.
Wow.
And just because of that, because I didn't take the role of a psychotherapist, white, middle-class woman psychotherapist with the answers. No, they had the answers. They had the stories.
Mm.
And because of that, 16 out of 20 men improved so radically
Mm.
that they were transferred out of maximum security into medium and minimum security.
Wow. And that's a whole new
Because why?
way.
Because they were respected,
Ah,
and because they had voice, they gained their voice. Somebody listened and believed them and
yeah.
published their work and
Mm.
gave them a public reading.
Mm.
All the things that we take for granted.
Beautiful. Yeah,
But
beautiful.
I still do the same process basically in my work. And it's the power of giving people the time and space and safety and community
Mm.
to find their own voice.
Absolutely.
And then when
Absolutely.
we have voice, we
Mm.
have some mastery over our
Mm.
lives.
Mm. And
Can
some
tell our story.
mastery, yes, some mastery over our internal processes, and that ability to be able
Absolutely.
to tell the difference between metaphor and reality. That really important distinction between what in our external world is causing this you know rage, fire, whatever, and how we can transform that in ways that are unself-destructive for a start, really, because otherwise, if you can't, that's where the drinking and the drugging and all the rest of it come in. And
And those, go on.
and I was just going to ask, with you working with these men, and it strikes me that this is back in the 80s, early 90s.
Well, the mid 90s by this time,
Right.
1994.
Right. It must have been a very enlightened bunch of people who were doing this within the system, taking into account, especially now, the change that has happened since then to now, where the majority of those people, I would imagine, would be diagnosed and medicated and unable to a large extent to be engaging in a lot of the work that you're talking about here.
Well, they were heavily medicated, and
Mm.
they would come shuffle. But here's the thing:
Mm.
the process of engaging in art making together,
Mm.
telling their stories, being heard, and hey, man, yeah, bro, I get that, being affirmed, it
Absolutely.
brought them out of this
Mm.
stunned, medicated shuffling.
Mm.
And one man, um, what waxy catatonia, where
Mm.
they would just sit in a posture like a statue
Yeah.
without moving.
Mm.
There was one point where somebody, in the process of this group of I may have said something that made him angry,
mm,
and that woke him up. He began moving, and he just joined the group like he'd always been there.
right.
So I sort of began to understand that it may look like nothing's happening to us, but inside there's a tornado,
Mm,
a storm of emotion so
mm,
powerful that it's paralyzing.
mm.
So
Yeah.
I just began seeing mental illness in terms of story, and that totally changed the
Mm,
frame.
yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, and also that remarkable capacity of the body, mind, soul, spirit, whatever, to break through that heavily medicated state, to actually move out of it and rejoin the world, so to speak, really. I mean, and that's an amazing thing to contemplate in itself.
It was amazing. It was
Mm,
awe-inspiring. And
mm,
and in fact, I experienced what I felt was the divine
mm,
coming into this room at one man I sort of gave them free rein.
mm,
I didn't want to be controlling. I believe in improvisational everything, because that's the process of becoming.
mm,
So in one group, a man stood up and he said, I want to sing now. And
mm,
he sang this very famous um, spiritual that everybody, guards, prisoners, everybody knew. And
mm,
he sang, and the people came and gathered around, and it was all, the whole atmosphere of this prison ward
mm.
changed. And
Wow.
I swear the air just sort of became golden. I
Mm.
mean, it was awe-inspiring.
Do you
But
remember the
I
name of the spiritual? Do you remember the name of the
take my hand, precious Lord. I
Oh,
will never forget it. And it's very well known.
I'm going
And
to.
he sang it, and then the guards and the nurses, they're all Black, they were all from the same neighborhoods. And they all went to the same, churches,
Hmm.
and they all knew that spiritual, and they all sang together.
Wow.
Like, I have chills even just remembering it, because that was like the ultimate of story. We
Absolutely.
belong. We're together. We're one here. Even me, the only white person. I
Mm,
was like practically on my knees.
yeah. Yeah. Mm, how amazing.
So I still use the lessons that I learned from those men in my work now. This is 30 years later.
And was that a program that continued?
Yes, it did. And it was very white, European, based on European mental health values. I mean, it was very well intentioned. It was a poetry therapy training program.
Mm,
Um, but, Freudian, um, assuming that European families' values could be translated into black a black family, which is like it's a matrilineal culture rather than a patriarchal culture. The fathers usually are absent. There's just no bridge really.
mm,
And the European notions of what a man is,
mm,
Euro-American, white,
mm,
um, were so destructive to these men.
mm, mm. And it would be interesting, and to actually be aware of that dissonance, but also to be seeing, because of the universality of the hero's journey, to be seeing that transformation happening, in spite of these differences and this mismatch. Is that the case?
So like the social workers are saying, what's your secret? What are you doing?
Mm,
And I would say, I don't know. I'm just listening, telling story. Telling myth.
mm,
People who are marginalized
mm,
really value myth because it gives them authenticity in a way that they can't have in our ordinary societies now.
mm, mm. But yes.
Um, so I didn't say the hero's journey. I don't even know if I knew the term at that point.
Mm, mm,
Just mythic story, the myths, Odysseus. I used the Odyssey a lot.
mm,
Odysseus trying to come home.
mm, mm,
And what's really interesting is, so the first draft of my book was about that experience. And I finished that right after you. I don't know if you know about the George Floyd murder in
yeah,
this country.
of course. Of course, we all know. We're all connected. We can't not know
So
stuff.
in that environment,
Mm,
Black people who read my book, my draft,
mm,
just smacked of white saviorism, which was the opposite of what I was experiencing and intending. It was Black saviorism. They saved me
mm, mm,
from this inauthentic life I was living.
mm. And could you have that conversation with the people, the black people who read your book? Did you have that exchange?
It in this country, it became so difficult to have. There
Mm,
was so much anger, righteous anger, yes, but that like an inability, everything was white entitlement.
mm,
So I would talk about, I want to create sanctuary. I want to create safety for these people.
mm,
And they would say to me, don't you know there's no such thing as safety in this world? That's only a white middle class woman could come up with an idea like that.
mm,
So, so it my I tore up that draft, or I didn't tear it up, but I, took it away.
mm,
And I'm in the process of redoing that book with trying not to use that story because it leads people to a discussion that I don't really want to have,
mm.
which
Can I
I want.
can I just interrupt for 2 minutes, 2 seconds? I thought I'd upgraded my Zoom thing, but apparently I haven't. So the time that we have left is just over 9.5 minutes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
So
so
you asked me what you want to ask me.
yeah, but I just want to go with the story of, what's happening here, because I mean it is that thing of, have you what happened after you started a fresh draft or something? When
Well, I'm working on it now, and I'm sort of trying to gear it to these times that we're in this time of transition, which is what a story is. A story is a journey through difficult change. But
absolutely.
so that's sort of where I'm at now. I must say, it doesn't have quite the passion
Oh, really?
for me now
Mm,
and the heart
mm. Because it's
that,
taken from the essence of what actually happened in the prison situation?
because that was such a powerful
Mm,
experience. It was life transforming to me.
mm,
Got me into this work, out
mm,
of journalism, got
mm.
me out of an unhappy marriage.
Yep, yep, yep.
It really, and I began doing it in homeless shelter, with marginalized people, homeless shelters, street teens with AIDS.
Mm,
But then I moved more into the mainstream.
mm,
But it's always had the same impact that
mm,
people arrive disconsolate over some
mm,
loss, terrible loss in their lives, some shattering. And I have like 7 sessions in my rite of passage program, and each is a threshold. The way I've sort of reframed Joseph Campbell's thresholds
mm,
to be more accessible now. Each is a threshold on the journey
mm,
to a place of true inner peace and belonging,
mm,
and then taking your story, our story, out into the world for other people who need to hear that story.
absolutely.
So it's very much about the intersection of personal and collective healing.
Mm, mm. And I think, going back to what you said about the response that you received, around George Floyd at that time, and that anger, that lashing out against, any person who's white from, most people who are black, before things subside a little bit, once we get past that stage of righteous anger and blame and throwing stones and all the rest of it, and come closer towards some level of understanding that in these situations, to a very large extent, and especially taking into account America as a nation, there are no there are no winners, no big winners in the situation that I see in the States, apart from people who have, vast amounts of money and power and no concern for anyone else apart from keeping that. But, all of us little people who are fighting each other, that's been caused, that's been brought about, divide and conquer, that sort of thinking and that sort of strategy.
Here's what I found. I've done a lot of groups for people from both sides,
Mm,
black, red, and blue, and
mm,
people in grief have
mm,
more in common than they do up, dividing them, because
mm,
they all share the experience of grief and their hearts become open to one another.
mm,
So I have come to feel that grief is potentially an initiation into a new
definitely.
reality.
Mm,
If it's framed in this story
mm,
together, that we
mm,
we can tell our stories without judgment,
mm,
without advice,
mm, mm.
without divisiveness, but just share our soul stories, we discover how much we have in common. And then that's where maybe we can begin to rebuild a new life together, a new
Ab-
a new America.
Absolutely, and a new world, and it's that thing of one of the questions that I did want to ask you that I'm fairly sure I sent you was how to go about applying this template to our current world situation, which I see as being a major
I can't hear you.
oh, a major turning point in history, a major transition for the whole world, really. And and it's that melting pot of political upheaval and knowing everything that we can possibly want to know if we choose to, corrupt leadership, climate change, etc., and that bringing about at whatever level, a deep grief, what's happened to our world.
I think at the ground level, the
Mm,
grassroots, where change really will happen now,
mm,
story has a part to play.
mm,
Because when people share, well, you see it with President Zelensky.
mm.
He has been able to do to rouse the whole world's support of Ukraine simply by telling the hero's journey story,
Mm,
the authentic story. This is what's happening on the ground, the struggle. This is what the Ukrainian people are standing up for. This is who we are. And then the vision of a new Ukraine as a model for
mm,
leading the world in the future.
mm,
So he's telling this transformative story that all of us can relate to. He's a family man separated from his family. It's his story. His story has become the Ukrainian story.
mm,
And we can relate to each other's stories if we can't relate to each other's political realities. So that's where I think my tiny contribution might be
mm,
in this world now, is to wherever I go to try to share this beautiful paradigm
mm,
of mythic story, hero's journey, whatever you want to call it,
mm,
of recreation tales.
mm, mm. And it's, I mean, and that's a lovely place to end this because it's recreation. It's that beautiful thing of, recognizing that pattern of, crisis, transformation, return differently, and it's that thing of movement, and it always has to involve movement, and this is a time of great movement and change, and if we're not navigating that great movement and change well, um, then then
Well, the people who aren't are the people who are fighting it, and they're the people who are
mm,
causing tremendous suffering in this world.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
I don't want to be, and you don't want to be, and we don't want to be those kind of people. We want to be the people of light,
mm,
bringing light to this.
mm. Look, thank you, Juliet. Thank you so much. I find this immensely interesting, but useful. I always come back to that point of this is useful stuff to know. The more of us who know this language, this ability to navigate, this way of being in the world,
Yes.
the better.
And we didn't talk at all about the writing part of my work, but that there's always like an improvisational writing portion where
Mm,
we go deep within and then bring it, if we share it with our community. And so,
absolutely. And we can do that at another time.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going.
Thank you for talking with me and listening and
Oh,
hearing my tale.
we will meet in Spain or Portugal or both, whichever.
We hope, yes.
Yeah. Have a
Take
lovely
care.
evening. Thank you. Bye, Juliet. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Mm.